President Trump recently decided to have the United States withdraw from the goals to limit carbon emissions under the Paris Accord. Even before that decision, his appointees had taken steps to eliminate curbs on pollution and higher standards on fuel efficiency for cars. The moves have been denounced by environmental groups, but also by many elected officials and even some corporations. Among the opponents in Massachusetts is the Conservation Law Foundation. We'd like to welcome its president, Bradley Campbell. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
First, we'll talk about just around the Boston area or Massachusetts. Does this decision by the president taking effect a few years from now, does it really make much of a difference?
Well, it may not make a big difference in the short term, but it's really a loss of opportunity in the short term because this is really the center of the tech economy. The solution, some of the most advanced energy projects and research are being done in this area. GE moved here because they saw this as the innovation economy. And so really it's a sacrifice of U.S. leadership in coming up with climate solutions. And that'll have an impact, I think it'll disproportionate impact in this area. And then of course, when it comes to climate change itself, intense rainstorms, sea level rise, and intense heat waves, this is also a particularly vulnerable region.
Even if you have to talk about the bigger picture on jobs, what do you see? Because one of the main justifications the president put out there for this is that he's going to create more jobs. I mean, not just in the coal mines, but also all these other places where there's less regulation going on. How do you weigh that against maybe the clean energy jobs?
Well, the president seems to be trying to revive industries that the market has spoken and has essentially put in decline anyway. Coal was not eliminated by regulation or by climate policy. Coal was forced out by cheap natural gas. And in turn, we expect gas to be forced out by renewables as they become more and more competitive and as we try to make the grid smarter and more resilient and less reliant on central fossil fuel plants.
What about the way things are changing, especially the sea levels in Boston? What do we see right now, and what do you take away from that?
Well, one of the things we see is that there are some very vulnerable facilities in and around the region. Right on Boston Harbor, the Everett facility, ExxonMobil, large oil and petrochemical storage and transfer station. Every projection of a Category 1 storm shows that facility underwater. And we've seen in Katrina, we've seen in Irene and Hurricane Sandy, those are exactly the types of facilities where the tanks collapse when they are inundated. And so we have a multi-billion-dollar investment by all the residents of the Commonwealth, but especially the citizens of Boston, in cleaning up Boston Harbor. And that effort is really, that investment has been put at risk by climate impacts that are on the horizon and some that are already here.
And it's also interesting that some of the areas that city officials have identified as prime opportunities for large-scale development, they're also seen as being vulnerable to rising sea levels.
Yeah, there's roughly $4 billion of new construction in the seaport right now. And probably less than 5% of that new construction is designed with future climate impacts in mind. A notable exception is the new GE facility, where they looked at climate conditions 50 years out, designed the facility to be able to be resilient to those conditions, raising the grade of the site and so forth, and then only asked for a 42-year license for the site. That's the kind of corporate leadership we're seeing, even though the city itself has not imposed any new requirements on builders in the seaport or otherwise on the coast to be climate ready.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Bradley Campbell from the Conservation Law Foundation. Of course, the other measure here is how much of a difference this Paris Accord would make, even if everybody stuck to the standards. And I guess by one estimate, it was supposed to maybe reduce global warming by 1 degree or almost 1 degree by the end of the century. The president says it's only 0.2 of a degree. Either way, it doesn't sound like a whole lot.
I don't think people put a lot of faith in the president's calculations of global temperature rise. Really, the purpose of the accord is to keep a global temperature rise to below 2 degrees centigrade, hopefully a degree and a half. Even with that increase, which seems small, but it would have an enormous impact. Entire island nations will disappear with that level of increase. We will see a very different climate in our region in 2030 than we see today. And people think of 2030 as very far away. A degree and a half is a very small amount. But when you think about it, if you're a parent with kids in first grade now, 2030 is when they're going to be coming out of college. And we should all want them to have a climate that's safe and to be able to have the kind of opportunities we've had in terms of a climate that is bearable and that in which our economy can thrive.
And we should mention, this is not just about people who have to bail out their houses. This is about people who might be suffering from heat island effects during the summer, or maybe not just the summer.
Yeah, one of the most lethal effects that we'll see very early on and are already seeing is the progressive increase in days in which the temperature exceeds 90 degrees. In those temperatures, we see increased deaths among seniors, among kids with asthma, and other vulnerable populations. And so we're really talking about matters of life and death, not aspirational matters of a few degrees of temperature. These are matters of public health and safety.
In between the climate deniers and environmentalists like yourself, there's this interesting middle ground area I've come across, and they're sort of saying that, yes, these things are happening, they're a problem, but we shouldn't respond by restricting the use or production of fossil fuels. We should just let voluntary incentives come into play, maybe some technological advances, and that will solve the problem.
Well, I think that the entire world, the roughly 200 nations that signed the Paris Accord, recognized, even Saudi Arabia has recognized, that there is no future in fossil fuels. And all of the capital flows worldwide are moving away from fossil fuels. And there are many non-regulatory ways to taper our fossil fuel use as we make that transition. For example, carbon pricing, which the Commonwealth's legislature is looking at right now. Those are mechanisms, non-regulatory, that would allow us essentially to break our addiction to fossil fuels, keep our economic growth, and not see significant changes in lifestyle. I think the concern people have is, oh, well, this means the heavy hand of government, this means Big Brother. And really what it means is taking advantage of what this country historically has done best, which is use science and technology to solve the challenges and threats to our communities.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Bradley Campbell from the Conservation Law Foundation.